Welcome back to the Assertive Podcast. I'm Erica.
I'm Jess.
And we are licensed professional counselors in Texas, reviewing Am I the Asshole Reddit threads to help you learn skills for communication, healthy boundary setting, and assertive interpersonal functioning. Today we are looking at expectations. When we share our expectations, what happens when we have unspoken expectations. And we're going to do this with a post titled, Am I the Asshole for Selling the House My Brother and His Family Live In? A few years ago, my brother needed help, so I let him move into one of my rental properties, and we did an all-legal lease agreement and everything. Because I was renting to him at a break-even point, we agreed that he was responsible for all the maintenance of the house and yard. Well, he has 4 kids, and the hot water tank isn't enough for his family, and he wants a new one. I told him to go ahead. He then proceeded to take the cost of the hot water tank and the installation of it from that month's rent. I reminded him of our agreement. He said he wasn't making improvements to my property for free. I said that the old hot water tank was fine, and he made the decision to replace it. Big argument ensued, and I didn't want to fight, so I said that he was not allowed to make any further changes to the house without my explicit agreement. So he stopped doing maintenance as a protest. The house itself is not pretty, but it is solid. It is old, and the wiring in it was not meant for all the modern electronics we have today. He wanted to add a new breaker box and run more outlets. I said, no thanks. I can't afford that since I'm not making any money on the house. He started getting bitchy about it, and then the rent started getting paid late. I tried talking to him, but he said that he had to buy some stuff for the house and he was low on cash. So I sold the house.
A man of action. Mm-hmm.
While the house itself isn't great, it is in an older part of the city, and the property itself is a quarter of an acre. This is like sibling rivalry at its finest.
Yeah. It's like, if you can't share it, I'm just going to destroy it.
Every time a house sells in the neighborhood, it is snatched up by developers and turned into multifamily units, or one guy did buy property and then built a McMansion on his land. I know a lot of the developers, and I didn't even need to formally list the house to have it sell in less than a week. My brother found out when he was served with an eviction notice. He called to ask what the fuck. So I told him that the house was causing me headaches and I had an opportunity to make some money, and so I took it. He said I should have offered him a chance to buy it. And I said that he was already having trouble making rent. How was he going to qualify for a mortgage? He told me I'm an asshole and that he has the money. He was just waiting to make me an offer. I said, if you have the money, why are you late on rent? He then started bad-mouthing me to all the family. A few of them took his side and tried to say I was being an asshole. So I offered all of them a chance to clear his debt if they wanted to share their opinion with me. None of them took me up on that offer. My parents are on my side, and they said I shouldn't have rented to him in the first place. I do feel bad for my sister-in-law and the kids, but I'm not going to spend the rest of my life subsidizing his. Am I the asshole?
Boy, there's a lot. Yeah, no good deed goes unpunished. Started off like in this, hey man, I'm opportunistic. Can you help me out? And they're like, yeah. And then this just got sour really fast here. So I think this is, a super good post to talk about expectations, because there are many on both the OPs and the brothers part of it.
Yeah.
Kind of talk, or what were your impressions of kind of the expectations, and how do you kind of talk about that?
Yeah.
Points.
I always say people do not know what's going on in your head. And I'm sure this is not the first time I've said that on here.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we have expectations, we have to communicate that, because nobody's going to know about those if we don't. And then we're going to fester and hold grudges when they didn't do what we wanted them to do, but yet we never told them that that's what we wanted or that's what we needed.
Yeah, so it's kind of having this like agenda and hoping that other people are privy to those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't know what episode it was, but I feel like you said unspoken expectations are resentments.
Yes, unspoken expectations are premeditated resentments.
There it is.
Yeah. So if you have something that you're wanting, no one's going to know that. So you can't be mad at other people for not being able to read your mind.
Correct.
So if there's some like specific outcome that you want, that's something that you need to like overtly articulate to the people who are going to make that happen to you.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's messy. This is just so messy.
Yeah, just mess. And I think even too, it's like they are doing a lot of behaviors in retaliation, but there's no real like constructive dialogue that's happening.
No.
And they're both just kind of reacting and like increasing in like viciousness a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, oh, I do think both parties are, how can we frame this? Focused on what they have control over. So
yes,
the brother says, I don't like how this is going. I'm not going to pay you rent. That is something he can leverage. The author says, I don't like how this is going. I'm going to sell the house. So both parties like did, I think, leverage the pieces that they had like impact over. But I think this was super duper sloppy.
Yeah. And it's extra messy because it's family. And I imagine that's one way they got away with this. I can't imagine a normal landlord tenant situation unless it was like really explicit in the lease that if we sell this, you're not going to be notified by me. The new owner is just going to serve you with an eviction notice.
That's so yeah. So they were doing, the first sentence was, or the first paragraph was like, I let him move into one of my rental properties and we did it all legal, lease agreement and everything. But they're kind of telling this in between line where part of it's how you would normally interact with the landlord, and part of it is not. If you don't like how something is in the place that you're leasing, you're not going to just go fix it and then invoice them. That wouldn't be how that's done. And if you were a landlord, you wouldn't say, hey, you do whatever, make any adjustments you want to the property, but I'm not paying for it. That wouldn't be what you do either. So they're in like this really messy in between where they're towing the line of like siblings and family, and then also this business relationship, and both dynamics are really sloppily bifurcated, I think, in this situation.
Yeah. Neither has clear boundaries. They don't have clear boundaries in the sibling relationship. They don't have clear boundaries in the business relationship.
In terms of like a cause and effect of like, if this does not happen, I'm going to have to do such and such kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love it too. Like how the author is like, this house is great. It's not made for a big family, but it's good. Well, it's not really made for like modern living, but it's a great little house. It's not really made for, and it's like, it's good until somebody goes to live in it. It's funny how he's like this person's describing their property a bit too.
Yeah. Well, and I think also if it is an older home, so it's maybe not that the electric didn't work or wouldn't have sufficed. It's you have all these brand new electronics that require more ampage than what the house was originally built with.
If I'm moving into a rental property, I'm not going to expect that to be perfectly equipped to serve my family.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody's helping me out, I'm not going to invest money into a property that I don't own either. So I think in terms of like a tenant, the brother's expectations, I think he went into that not really being realistic on what a rental experience is.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure he was realistic. He just was not realistic in that situation. I'm sure he has had other formal rental agreements.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been in the tenant role before and done that appropriately. My guess is, and there's some assuming in here, he thought he could get away with things because this was his brother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just for the sake of clarity, we can, as we're like prepping, we're talking about how the author is very non-descriptive of the house. We're like leaning towards this being like a male author.
Yes.
Female, we might describe it with a little bit more like fluffy adjectives. So if like we do assume this is like a male to male dynamic, I think that can give some insight too of maybe the level of communication that could have gone into this on the front end. Not to be stereotypical, but there are patterns, let's be realistic about that.
And I do think, statistically speaking, maybe not like the newer generations coming up because they're getting different education. Mm-hmm. But men do tend to be like action oriented and less focused on the feelings of other people.
Yeah.
And I can imagine if this was a sister who's thinking about like her brother and nieces and nephews and sister-in-law being like, oh, I can't just like evict you.
But yeah, like that's a really good point that it's not just like siblings kind of like taking stabs. It's like his nieces and nephews and his sister-in-law. It's like his whole family that, yeah, he has 4 kids, so it's 6 people that he's saying, hey, out of petty principle, I'm evicting you. You
Yep.
know, like, talk about damage to those relationships, and that would be hard to come back from, I think.
Yeah.
So expectations, how do you direct clients to just discuss and like communicate expectations when they come up?
I tell them it's just like any other conversation. It doesn't have to be this scary thing. I'm trying to think. So for me, if I go somewhere, I want there to be parking, and that's the expectation. If you invite me somewhere and I have to like drive in circles for 10 minutes to find parking,
Parking anxiety is a real thing, isn't it?
I'm driving home. You're not going to see me.
I can see that happening. Because you'd be like, nah, man, not working that hard for that.
I'm not.
Yeah.
And so I always just ask up front. It's not even sharing my expectation. I'm just going to ask the question, do you know what the parking situation is? Have you been there before?
Oh, so you're also just clarifying for yourself to be able to expect something.
Yes. Like I know what my own expectations are. So some of this is we do have to have a level of self-awareness. Right. I know I'm agitated from the jump if I had to spend however long looking for parking and then I get inside. I'm going to have to like chill for a couple of seconds. I can't just jump into socializing.
Oh, so you would use expectations as maybe a way of kind of like visualizing how an event's going to maybe play out. Like you want to have a good idea of what to imagine to prepare for that.
Mm-hmm. And folks with anxiety do this a lot naturally. Like they pre-plan these events in their heads, and then they come up with all these different scenarios so that they feel kind of emotionally prepared for any variation that may occur.
Yeah.
But it all usually stays in their head.
That mental game plan.
Yes. And so it's just sharing with people, hey, when we go here, I expect this.
Oh, so you're just kind of sharing your mental visualization of what you are anticipating that to go like.
Yeah.
And like how I'm planning or how I'm seeing this or what I'm hoping for this is that also the same vision that you're sharing for this experience?
Yes.
Yeah, I like that.
Yep. It gets, I think, a little tricky in relationships. I think we often expect our partners to anticipate our needs, and not everybody is good at that. And so if your anniversary is coming up and you are anticipating your significant other to just remember that when they have never remembered another date in their life, except maybe Christmas and their birthday, you're probably going to have to put that on a shared calendar. You're going to have to remind them. You're going to have to like talk about what you guys want to do together to celebrate.
So it's if you have a situation where you are going to be disappointed if a certain outcome doesn't occur, that would be an expectation to communicate.
Correct. Yeah. And
I think that is hard in relationships because we would hope that the more that somebody knows us and the more willing somebody is to meet our needs, that we would have to do less clarifying conversations. So like I know like when I have clients, I don't think it's normally explicitly stated like this, but it's something like I want them to know by this point what I'm expecting. And I think that can be hard because even maybe you could say, hey, it's our anniversary. I expect that you're going to remember and have something planned. And I think that is a balance because I think a lot of some of that mind reading comes in of just like anticipatory of like, don't we know each other well enough for this to be like this known thing? You know, I think that can be confusing in relationships to really back into it to say like, what level is mind reading and what level is just like familiarity with one another. You know, we can like, because part of like you want to be able to anticipate somebody a little bit too.
Yeah. Maybe the flip side to that is I've had clients say that and yet have never once in the history of the relationship shared an expectation. And with the population I work with, a lot of times they don't really share the disappointment either. So there's no feedback loop for their significant other to start to learn from and make adjustments in behavior. You have these expectations, you get disappointed, you get in these little moods, you blame it on something else because you don't want to seem like needy or clingy or too much. And then the pattern just keeps repeating because they have no idea what's actually happening.
That makes sense. It's really accompanied with like a passive communication style where not only are we not expressing expectations, but then we're also not expressing how the lack of fulfilled expectations makes us feel, so then our partner is just flying blind as we score, keep, and build up resentment.
Correct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I imagine, and for things like a trip or some kind of agenda activity, I can see that being easy to field for expectations because we're visualizing there's like a time management and like a scheduling thing going on there. Regarding expectations for this situation, are we maybe kind of thinking that each person came in with some kind of schema of like, this is what a landlord does, this is what a tenant does? That maybe made it difficult to know what expectations weren't going to get talked about?
I think they maybe had that intention, but neither one of them really stuck with their role as tenant and landlord.
Exactly.
And so I think that is where the messiness comes in.
I agree.
I also think there was a lot of agreeing to things without talking about the details. So somebody's saying, hey, I want to replace the hot water tank because this isn't working for our needs. I'm going to be like, how much is that? And they give me some dollar amount. And I'll be like, well, I can think about that. That's not really something I can afford to do. I'm not making money on this house because I'm renting to you at a break even. I can increase your rent and start setting that money aside for that.
Yeah.
But that's just not something I have the money to do at this time. And so then they said, well, can I just do it myself? And I would be like, if you want to do it yourself and it doesn't cause any additional problems that then need additional repairs, go for it. But I'm not also going to reduce your rent because you're doing that. These are all conversations that should have happened up front before I said, yes, go do that. It should have been clear. Like, if you pay for this, like, I still expect my same rent amount and I expect it on time.
Yes, and the conversation where he was like, hey, he says the hot water tank isn't big enough for family and wants a new one. I told him to go ahead. That was the first pitfall of like, what does that mean? Go ahead. Like, yes, make adjustments to my home without me paying for it. Like, so you're saying that was really like ambiguous feedback.
Yes.
And the word, he said, he said he's responsible for all the maintenance of the house and yard. It was hard too, because you don't necessarily know what words are subjective until they're being received, right? So maintenance for a landlord perhaps means one thing, and maintenance for the tenant perhaps means another thing. If something is not meeting our needs from the get-go, continuing to maintain it would but maybe feel nonsensical. And so I think there was even like clarity on even some of the words that had some ambiguity around them. Yeah. But if somebody says go for it, I'd be like, oh, cool. I would probably assume that they were covering it in rent too,
Well, I think even as a tenant, I'm not assuming that.
You would go clarification because you don't want to be out $5,000 for a water heater repair kind of thing. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. But that's just me. I want to know, I want to be able to budget, and I want to know where this money is coming from.
Yeah. So as a rule of thumb, if there's, I think anything quantified, anything with a number on it, where it's time, money, anything that has like a numerical value, have a lot of clarity around that. So hey, how much is this going to cost? You're having really explicit conversations about finances and things like that, timelines, dates, all those kinds of stuff.
And really, when they talk about like the original agreement, it's like maintenance of house and yard. As the OP mentioned, that he wasn't really maintaining the water heater. There was nothing wrong with it. If they didn't have 6 people living in the house, it probably would have worked just fine. And nobody would have batted an eyelash at it. But because they probably did have all 6 people trying to get ready in the same small time window, it was an issue. So this isn't really a maintenance issue. So maybe for the brother renting, it was like, well, this doesn't really fall under my purview. It's not really maintenance. It just needs to be upgraded.
Right. Yeah. And I think if they had more clarifying conversations from that initial conversation, the rest of these string of events would not have occurred.
Correct.
But because it's not like they were like on good foot, they were getting along and it was kind of easy going, but that created a lot of pitfalls. And so I think having clarity on the front end is helpful. So maybe even it comes off obnoxious or maybe even petty to get into the nitty gritty, but that could have created a whole different chain of events here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he said big argument. Or the author, big argument. I didn't want to fight. So I said that he was not allowed to make any further changes to the house without explicit agreement. And I think that seeking to avoid conflict creates a lot of conflict.
And I also think this seems like a silly thing to put in here because he agreed to the water heater. So to then say like, you can't do anything without my agreement, of according to you, you gave him the go-ahead. It's not like he just called somebody up, had it installed, and then took it out of that month's rent and sent you a text and say, hey, I did this and I'm deducting it from the rent. You gave him the go-ahead. So then your solution to this was don't do anything without my go-ahead?
Yeah.
How does that fix it?
That's like, the solution is doing the same thing that happened the first time. Yeah, that's a good point. The more I'm reading this, the more I'm like, the author has done fucked up. Oh boy. And I think I don't know like a state by state thing, but like I know in Texas, you're not allowed to withhold rent unless the living quarters are unsafe, basically. So like I know like AC in Texas, that's one thing, but there's water pouring through the ceiling, there's safety issues. So for him to like withhold rent as a kind of conflict flex, he is in the wrong for that. I think that's technically like kind of illegal. I think that so they're each, I think they're leveraging the sibling dynamic, I think, to make things increasingly messy. Where I think if at any one point one of them had fell back into the role of tenant or landlord, this also would have been resolved. But because they let those lines blur and blur and blur, it got worse here. And I know this is probably a function of anxiety. In my personal life, I realize like sometimes it's like a whole week in advance, but definitely to the day, I hour by hour know exactly how I'm going to be spending my time. I pack it in very tight. I'm super organized in how I spend my time. So but if you are my partner, you don't have access to my Google Calendar, so you don't know what that looks like, but I know exactly what's going on. And I think even sometimes lots of times if in really in household, in partnership, there's going to be a balance where one partner might be a little bit higher intensity on some stuff like that. And so sometimes it even looks like simple stuff of when you wake up of like, hey, this is what's going on in my day today. I'm going, I have work and then I'm going to go to the gym and then dinner will be around this time. And this is what I'm making. And I think even like just sharing about if you have some kind of image of what your day looks like, that's an expectation. And if you want like harmony, you have to let other people know what is going on in your day. So sometimes it's big things, but sometimes it's just the day-to-day stuff of if you have an agenda full, and you have control over that, other people still need to like respond to that, to know what to expect of you as well. I think just sometimes even over communicating of like, even if you have a calendar filled up, let your loved ones know what's going on for you that day, if they're going to be engaging with that. We talked about in our financial boundaries episode, I think there comes to some financial boundaries here because it's mixing business with family.
Yes.
What do you think? If a family decided they wanted to mix some money in with a family dynamic, maybe what are some kind of pitfalls to avoid or general guidelines that you would give to a client?
I would do what they did up front and get a lease agreement. And because it's family, I would have that over communicate. So if it's you're responsible for maintenance, all maintenance, is there a cap on that? If we need to redo all of the electrical, and this is like multiple thousands of dollars, am I still responsible for that? Or is there a cap? Like I cover things up to $200.
Oh, but if like the foundation's needing fixed or something, you might have some. Okay, that's a good idea. For sure.
So I think I would do that. Another pitfall, I think, would be how we have these conversations and like who is privy to these conversations. I think if we have a problem in our business relationship, we need to handle that in a business-like setting. We're not doing that over Christmas dinner.
Oh, yeah, smart.
So like, let's not ruin family time with a bunch of like business drama and vice versa. If you and I are sitting down and we're discussing the lease, I don't want to hear about the time in third grade when I crashed your bike.
I mean, I do like selfishly, but yeah, not appropriate.
And so keeping each space defined and like what conversations do we have when? Okay.
It's almost like kind of you're saying like having general workplace boundaries of like don't be checking emails at Thanksgiving dinner, right? Like have some like compartmentalization, I guess is what you're saying. Compartmentalization and roles and when things are being discussed.
Yeah. Also, as far as like the financial boundaries apart from the rent amount, how we're doing maintenance and who's in charge of that and putting dollar amounts around that. Do we have late fees? What do late fees look like? How are those charged? What does the eviction process look like? Basically giving them informed consent. You may not know this, but these are the state laws. I have to give you 30 days or 60 days notice.
And if you pay rent late, these are the fees, or this is the amount of time you can go with the delinquent rent before you get evicted. And having, even though it feels icky to talk about, having worst case scenarios being really clear up front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Landlord sibling has multiple rental properties, as they stated.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that they have like a landlord role firmly defined, that they're not this lackadaisy in their other properties. But again, they're probably also making some money from those properties that they can then invest back into them when problems pop up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think your brother doesn't necessarily know what fair rental value is.
Yeah.
And I would have probably still made enough of a profit that if something popped up, I could cover it. Because chances are, if they're needing to rent from me, they're having some financial problems.
So you would have really leaned into kind of the professional role if you were the OP of experience. I know how this goes. I have other properties. This needs to be a little bit more cut and dry than like the sibling messiness.
Yeah. I would have maybe still given them a discount, but doing it at a pure break even that I can really only pay mortgage and taxes doesn't give me any type of safety net. I'm having to rely on the safety net from other properties to subsidize it.
Okay. So you think maybe the OP was being a little too generous, perhaps, and that they set themselves up to be at a detriment if any other thing went wrong. So maybe they needed to be a little bit more realistic in what at no profit to me, that could have been reworked a little bit to where, okay, this means like there has to be a little bit of wiggle room for cushion.
Yeah. Because if they're struggling and they need your help, if there's some big repair that needs to happen, realistically, are they able to handle that in a timely manner that's not going to create more problems? So if we have a leak and they're supposed to go fix that, but they don't have the money to do it, and now this leak has been going for 6 months, and we probably have mold and we have water damage.
Oh yeah, they're kind of like set up for disaster. Like if anything went wrong, this was probably not going to go very well. The way it was structured. Yeah, there's no wiggle room on anybody else's part there. I don't like either at the end. What do you say? The brother, the non-OP, basically said, I had the money. I was just waiting for you to make me an offer. I mean, talk about unspoken expectations. I think that's probably, I'm going to guess, I'd be like, I don't think that's fucking true, first of all. I'd be just skeptical of that. But I think that's just like so kind of shitty. But it's almost, I'm imagining like a teenage girl who gets all flustered and runs out of the room and being like, nobody follow me. But then it's like, really supposed to come chase her? It's kind of like one of those things where it's like, dude, just grow some fucking balls and tell them what you want. And I think first, like, I was just waiting for you to know what I wanted. It's like, what the hell? Like, if you wanted to buy a house for your family, why would you not be upfront about that? I think that was kind of a weird thing to throw out there at the end as well.
Yes. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's all bullshit. I think that was probably his expectation. I think he probably assumed that his sibling would eventually sell the house.
Probably. And again, if that's what you want, go get what you want in those situations. Go into the lease agreement of saying, I want like a rent to own arrangement. Yeah. Like, if you already come into something with an agenda, why not like leverage that and have those hard conversations up front of like, what is what best case scenario? What's the greatest capacity for this situation? And I think that those conversations needed to happen. And I don't think he was late on his rent because he didn't have the money. I think he was late on the rent because he was withholding it out of punishment.
I think that as well. So they both had different expectations that they didn't communicate. There was poor communication from the get-go. And it just snowballed into this big mess that then involved the whole family. And I think when we talk about what are like pitfalls we would avoid, that would be a pitfall. You're triangulating with the rest of your family.
Right. And I think it's more so just trying to it's like vindicating yourself and figuring out who's really to blame. There's no really productivity that's going to come out of those conversations aside from just finger pointing. Yeah.
And that's exactly what they're doing. It's like, well, all these family members took one person's side, but the parents took the other person's side. And it's like, you both were in the wrong here.
They do that so often with these Reddit threads where they'll say who's on what side. And it's like, none of us know these people. And if you're an asshole, you're probably raised by assholes. Nobody gives a shit who's on your side. But everybody keeps throwing it into these posts of like, so-and-so believes me. It's like, I don't know these people, nor do I care. So I think that just like further kind of communicates the pettiness of like wanting to know this person's on my side and they have my back. I think that's just kind of expressive of like nobody gives a shit about who's on your back. Doesn't mean you're an asshole or not. It means you're asking assholes for advice. That's all that means. So I think it's just like I think further kind of like airing out that self-righteousness a little bit, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
I love that too. It's like that sounds so like Game of Thrones. Like, if he who pays his debt may speak in the court, and it's all quiet. I think that's like a weird. Yeah, I like that. Like if you're gonna have
I kind of like that. Yeah,
it's very like old school, like medievally. I'm not saying don't bring it back. I'm just saying it is.
You want to give your 2 cents? I want your literal 2 cents.
Yeah,
and so I think it was maybe a good boundary, but it's a lot of talk and not a lot of action. So they want to come in with all of the talk and give their opinion, but nobody wants to actually do anything productive and helpful to resolve the situation. From that perspective, I could see that maybe being a fair boundary of like, this really doesn't involve any of you guys. You actually want to be involved and give me your opinion, clear his debt. Then I'll take your opinion seriously. That's fair.
I also think the author is overtly being an asshole. So I think that's kind of like saying the only way I'm going to be held accountable is if you pay me for it. And there's a little bit of that too, of like, okay, I think you can probably hear their feedback and what they're saying is probably true. You're inviting them to participate in a conflict by having them pay off somebody's debt a little bit. Or I think that their feedback is probably accurate. That I think it was pretty shitty for him to make them homeless, which we talk about boundaries, maybe episode 1 or 2, talk about like if boundaries are clear at the front end and we have this if this then I dynamic set up and you have a lot of clarification before it gets rolling, all the heavy lifting is done. By the time that you enforce it, you're just reporting the news. So I think if they had been really detailed, and again, maybe they didn't know what they didn't know. We can't anticipate every situation that could go on in a renting agreement. Obviously, the author does this, it sounds like, with he probably has more experience. Right. But I think if they had taken some time to have a little bit more clarifying conversations on the front end, then enforcing the boundaries later and even being firm, even if the rental brother was agitated, that guy would have still been able to, like, the OP could still maintain his integrity because they already had those heavy liftings up front.
And I also think you not knowing what you don't know isn't really an excuse for you to be an ass or to engage in petty behavior. You just have to take that loss. And it's a learning experience for your business.
Yeah, totally. So where they could have said like, hey, this wasn't really clarified. Let's just go ahead and like, we'll deal with this, figure this out. And then going forward, these are the future expectations. Not just, hey, ask me explicitly, but there needs to be some like quantified parts behind that.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So I think the OP had opportunity to take accountability for the lack of professionalism.
Yeah.
Because that was on his part.
Yeah. And so from OP's perspective, I think what could have gone better was having a tighter lease agreement that's further amended to count for maybe the family messiness, if you're going to be willing to do that. More clear feedback and expectations going forward once that first hiccup did happen with the hot water heater. And I think once rent started to be being paid late, that's when you have the conversations of like, didn't think this punch was going to get thrown. It seems like it's up there. So if you don't pay me in 30 days, I'm going to have to evict you guys, and to having some more kind of, limits like that. And then, once the family starts getting involved, to set maybe conversational boundaries of, hey, he's out here kind of shit talking me and appreciate it if you didn't participate in that. If you choose to, that's your prerogative, but I don't want to be a part of these dialogues going forward because this just feels messy and sloppy. Get to have limits there too, as opposed to further figuring, the parents are on my side, which means he's still participating in the messiness of the family drama too. Yep. What do you think the renter sibling could have done differently?
I think the renter sibling could for sure have taken more accountability in asking questions and clarifying questions as far as, okay, I want to replace this water heater. If I'm paying for it up front, are you going to cut me a check? Are we deducting that from the rent? How do we get this back? He heard go ahead and just took that to mean what he wanted it to mean and didn't clarify. So he could have done it at the time it was installed. I think clarifying again before you change the rent amount would have been another opportunity to say like, hey, I'm sending you rent. It's this much because the water heater was this much, or the water tank, hot water tank was this much, whatever it is that he replaced.
Mhm.
I think he still had the accountability to uphold his end of the lease agreement, which
Yeah.
means you can't stop doing maintenance as a protest.
Mhm.
You're in violation of your lease agreement regardless of whatever else is going on.
Yeah.
I think he had the accountability to share his expectation if he wanted to buy the house, maybe at the time of installing the hot water tank, saying, hey, I'm thinking about purchasing a house. Would you be willing to sell me this one? I know it needs like new hot water tank. We need to do a new breaker box. We discounted those from purchase price.
There you
Like,
go.
is this something we could do? Would you even consider selling it to me?
It was more of like a switching from like a renting to like an investing kind of framework.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea.
So he had some missed opportunities on his end as well that I think he could have improved on. And then bad mouthing to the rest of the family is just messy. You got into business with your sibling. Whatever happens in that relationship, you need to try and preserve the remaining family relationships. And so going around and starting this huge family feud and splitting your family in half is not really beneficial. And it's not going to solve your problem at the end of the day.
Right. So you're just kind of being like dramatic. There's not really a resolution to your complaints at this point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is just like passive aggression all over the place, isn't it? These secret agendas, all these mind readings. Nobody's really direct or able to really get their needs met because nobody's expressing needs.
Yeah. I think the only person who potentially got a need met was the landlord. He got
sold
some
his
money out of
house.
it because he sold it.
Yeah.
He got rid of the headache with his brother. But on the flip side, you got all of this family drama that's going to last who knows how long.
And really, and you can see the deterioration of the relationship through this post. They started off where it sounds like the rental brother felt comfortable asking for cooperation, like during a hard time. It's like they had a pretty casual, even banter about the water heater. Both parties were pretty easygoing, and they just watched this like deterioration into they're gonna have to do a lot of repair. I mean, I can imagine if one of my brothers-in-law treated me that way, that would be really hurtful. If like my kid's uncle did that to me, I'd be like, God, I don't know if we're gonna really be able to interact with this person. You know? Yeah.
Absolutely.
But it just feel like vindictive, like dehumanizing, to say like the principles of this are more important than like the welfare of my family, like damn.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts you got on this one before we give our asshole verdict?
No.
Okay. Give the verdict. What are you thinking?
I think this one is probably no surprise to you guys. I think they are both assholes.
Yeah.
They both engaged in passive-aggressive communication. They both had unspoken expectations. They both moved into aggressive behaviors without communicating needs or thoughts or wants. And then it just continued to pile up all of the pettiness. And so at the end, you have this huge family feud going.
Yeah.
Summarize it for us.
Oh, boy. So expectations are premeditated resentments. So oftentimes we know we have expectations when we're starting to have visualizations around some kind of agenda. So we have some idea of what we want it to look like, some mental picture of an outcome. So if you find yourself having thoughts like that, that's when it's time to communicate an expectation. And sometimes that's day-to-day living. Sometimes that's like a big thing, like a trip or a major transition. If you are going to go on the adventure of mixing family and business, compartmentalizing is very helpful. So that looks like having clear delineations within those roles. So if business will remain in a business setting, family will remain in a family setting, and having as much clarity up front on the business interactions is kind of essential. Yeah, passive aggressive behavior is just basically pettiness. So nobody's needs are going to get met if nobody knows what your needs are. Talking about that head on in an assertive way could de-escalate conflict. What else? What did I miss? Oh, and should we talk about this? Somebody else being an asshole doesn't justify you to be an asshole. So if that's your conflict style, again, that's probably passive aggression. If you really want your needs to get met, even if somebody else is being petty, you need to do your part to be like on the up and up of what you're wanting and what's going wrong for you.
And I feel as though we did talk about this in communication styles. I think it is episode 1 or 2. I think it's 1. But if you are interacting with somebody who is in an passive aggressive or an aggressive communication pattern, and you can stay assertive, a couple of things will happen. Either they will escalate to try to get you to match them, or they'll get frustrated with the imbalance in communication levels and they'll eject themselves from the conversation. Or they'll drop down to your level and be like, okay, they're trying to have a calm, rational conversation with me. And I can poke this bear as much as I want, and it's not going to kill me. So maybe I should just have an adult conversation.
So no, regardless of what you're interacting with, assertive is always best.
Yes.
Yeah. True.
And at the end of the day, I don't know if I've said this on here. I say this to my clients a lot. Other people's behavior is a reflection of them and who they are as a person and their values. Only your behavior is a reflection of you. So if somebody is treating you shitty, that's not a reflection on you. It feels shitty and it feels like sometimes it's our fault, but it's still their fault. There's still the asshole there.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to be an asshole, don't be the asshole. It's that simple.
It's like stay in your lane. Their behavior is their behavior, and I don't have to be reactive to that.
Correct.
Or personalize that.
Which is hard. It's hard when somebody's coming at us in those non-healthy or toxic communication patterns to not get on the defensive. But that's the beauty of like assertive communication. It keeps other people's guards down. And so you almost have to create assertive listening skills to where you can kind of deflect all of the things they're saying and read between the lines to figure out what they're actually trying to tell you. And that's a much harder skill. It takes a lot of practice.
I was reflecting, over the weekend. I'm like, I think the hardest thing everyone deals with are relationships. Of all the clients I have and what we talk about, I'm like, man, relationships are hard. So yeah, nobody does this perfectly. We all have improvements and skills to learn, and relationships, no matter the kind, are challenging.
Yeah. Do your best. And if you aren't doing your best, do the next best thing. Like own up to it and be like, wow, I was really in a mood. That was
chose violence today. I apologize.
Yes. I should have said that a lot nicer.
I need a do-over, a mulligan as it's called. Let me try that again.
Yep. All right. That's what we have for you guys today on this one. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts. You can send them to us at assertivepodcast@gmail.com. Until next time.